I always knew my stepmother was a manipulative gold digger, but I never expected to find my late mother's hidden diaries proving she was actually a ruthless criminal. On Mother's Day, surrounded by her high society friends, I handed her a beautifully wrapped box containing the exact evidence that would send her to federal prison. The look on her face when she realized her perfect life was over was absolutely priceless. I am Madeline, 34 years old, and I work as a user experience researcher at a health tech corporation in Seattle. For years, I watched my stepmother tear apart my family while playing the perfect victim. If you have ever had to deal with a toxic family member who manipulated everyone around them, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Today, I am going to tell you exactly how I destroyed her carefully crafted illusion. The Emerald Country Club was buzzing with the gentle hum of clinking crystal and polite laughter. It was Mother's Day and my father Thomas had spared no expense. He reserved the grandest table in the main dining room, inviting 15 of his most influential business partners, their wives, and a few carefully selected relatives. At the head of the table sat Cassandra, my 54-year-old stepmother. She held up her wrist intentionally, angling it so the midday sun would catch the diamonds on the brand-new Rolex my father had just gifted her. Her 30-year-old daughter Brittany sat next to her, looking profoundly bored while scrolling relentlessly on her phone. Cassandra beamed at me, a condescending smirk playing on her lips. She lived to humiliate me and my younger brother Jason. She loved framing us as bitter, ungrateful children who simply could not accept that our father had moved on after our mother Clara passed away 8 years ago. I took a slow sip of my mimosa, feeling a strange calm wash over me. As a researcher, my entire career revolves around predicting human behavior and understanding exactly how users interact with frameworks. Cassandra was the most predictable person I had ever studied. She thrived on public adoration status and absolute control over my father's wealth. But today, I controlled the narrative. I designed this entire afternoon with clinical precision. I reached down and pushed a heavy velvet box toward her. "Open it, Cassandra," I said, keeping my voice perfectly pleasant. "The real gift is tucked right under the silk lining." She smiled, her manicured fingers eagerly pulling back the luxurious white silk, undoubtedly expecting fine jewelry. Instead, her fingers brushed against a stack of heavy laminated papers. The arrogant smirk on her face froze, stuck in a grotesque parody of joy as her eyes focused on the first document. It was a high-resolution scan of a mortgage deed bearing a signature that was distinctly not hers. Her eyes darted frantically to the next piece of paper, a massive bank wire transfer log. And finally, sitting at the very bottom, a copy of a handwritten letter on pale yellow stationery, my mother's personal stationery. I watched the exact moment her reality shattered. The blood drained from her face so fast she looked physically ill. The sparkling Rolex suddenly seemed very heavy on her trembling wrist. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked up at me, pure panic and raw terror blowing apart her carefully constructed facade. "What is the matter, Cassandra?" I asked, my voice carrying clearly over the chatter of the country club. "Do you not like it?" It took me 3 grueling months to put it together. To understand how we arrived at this spectacular implosion, we have to rewind exactly 3 months. It started on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday when my father summoned my brother Jason and me to the family estate. The sprawling 5-bedroom house in the Seattle suburbs used to belong to our mother, but now it was entirely Cassandra's domain. Thomas had called it a family bonding exercise. That was just his cowardly way of saying Cassandra had ordered him to clear out the basement so Brittany could have a private home gym. Brittany had not held a real job in 5 years, preferring to style herself as a lifestyle influencer funded entirely by my father's bank accounts. My father, a 62-year-old man who traded his backbone for Cassandra's approval a decade ago, stood at the top of the basement stairs. He pointed vaguely at the boxes of my mother's old belongings stacked in the damp corners. "Just bag it all up for donation, Madeline," he said, avoiding my eyes entirely. "Your mother would not want us hoarding old junk. Cassandra has the contractors coming next week to lay down the rubber flooring for Brittany's Pilates area. Right, Jason muttered bitterly, hauling a heavy box of old winter coats. Because Brittany's Pilates takes precedence over our mother's entire existence. Do not start, Jason, my father snapped, showing a rare flash of anger to mask his guilt. Cassandra has been very patient with your attitudes. Just get it done. He abruptly closed the door, leaving Jason and me in the dusty, stagnant air of the basement. We worked in heavy silence for hours, painstakingly sorting through the remnants of a woman who had loved us fiercely before pancreatic cancer had stolen her away. It was agonizing work. Every faded photo album, every handwritten recipe book felt like losing her all over again. As I was moving a heavy water-damaged bookcase away from the far wall, I noticed a strange gap in the drywall behind it. The paneling was loose, hastily nailed back into place with cheap hardware. Frowning, I wedged a screwdriver behind the wood and pried it open with a sharp crack. A cloud of ancient dust puffed into the air, making me cough violently. Hidden deep in the dark cavity between the wooden studs was a small, ornate wooden box with a heavy brass latch. It was my mother's jewelry box, the exact one my father claimed had been tragically lost during her final transfer to the hospice facility. My heart hammered painfully against my ribs as I pulled it out into the dim light. Jason! I called out, my voice tight and trembling. You need to come look at this. Jason dropped a trash bag and hurried over, wiping his dirty hands on his jeans. We opened the brass latch together, holding our breath. There was no jewelry inside. Instead, there was a stack of my mother's personal journals bound tightly with rough twine and a thick rubber-banded bundle of bank statements from an account I had never seen before. My hands shook uncontrollably as I reached out and opened the top journal, completely unaware of the explosive secrets waiting on those pages. The journal leather cover was brittle under my fingertips. I flipped past the mundane entries from a decade ago, straight to the final pages marked with a frayed satin ribbon. The dates corresponded to the last 6 months of my mother life, when the pancreatic cancer had confined her to the upstairs master suite. Jason leaned over my shoulder. His breathing was loud in the suffocating silence of the basement. I traced the pale yellow paper. The jagged, desperate strokes of my mother handwriting blurred as hot tears stung my eyes. I forced myself to focus. I read the ink out loud. My stomach plummeted into a bottomless void. Thomas thinks I do not know. He thinks the heavy medication has made me blind to it. Cassandra is not just my private nurse. I heard them talking in the hallway last night. She has been his mistress for 3 years, and Thomas is letting her handle my medical funds. They are draining my private accounts. They are just waiting for me to die. I stopped reading. The air in the basement suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I stared at the words over and over, hoping my mind was playing tricks on me. A mistress, Jason finally whispered. The words sounded like ash in his mouth. She was not a nurse at all. She was his mistress. While Mom was dying right upstairs, he was sleeping with her under our own roof. Look at the dates, Jason, I said. My voice turned eerily calm as the UX researcher in my brain kicked in. I automatically sought patterns and data points amidst the emotional wreckage. Mom wrote this 3 weeks before she passed. That means Cassandra was in this house posing as a hired caregiver while fully entrenched in an affair with Dad. But that is not even the worst part. Look at what Mom says about the accounts. I set the journal down carefully and picked up the thick bundle of bank statements. They were from an old private credit union my mother used before her illness escalated. The statements were torn at the edges as if someone had tried to destroy them but stopped halfway. Perhaps they were interrupted, or maybe they simply got careless. I flipped through the pages. My eyes scanned the withdrawal columns. The numbers printed in stark black ink were absolutely staggering. $50,000 transferred to an unknown limited liability company. Another $30,000 wired directly to an offshore account. $75,000 withdrawn in a cashier check just a month before her death. I traced the destination accounts. They did not match any clinic or hospital I remembered from her treatment. She was draining the medical funds, I said. My blood ran completely cold. Mom, private life insurance payouts, and her personal savings. Cassandra was taking it all, and Dad let her do it. We need to call Naomi. Jason said instantly. His face transformed into a mask of pure rage. Naomi was Jason's wife of 3 years, a brilliant, no-nonsense African-American woman who worked as a forensic accountant for a top-tier consulting firm in downtown Seattle. If there was a financial trail to be followed, Naomi could track a single-dollar bill through a hurricane. Not yet, I cautioned. I slid the bank statements and the journal back into the wooden box. If we walk upstairs right now and throw this in their faces, they will deny it. Dad will gaslight us into oblivion. Cassandra will cry and play the victim, and they will find a way to destroy these documents forever. We need to secure the data first. I am scanning everything to my encrypted cloud drive the second I get back to my apartment. I zipped the wooden box securely into my duffel bag, hiding it beneath a pile of old sweatshirts. We finished cleaning the basement in a state of hyper-focused silence. Every time my father checked on us from the top of the stairs, asking if we had found anything interesting, I looked him dead in the eye and smiled. I told him it was mostly just old junk destined for the donation bin. He bought the performance completely. The next evening, I sat alone in my downtown apartment staring at my dual monitors. I had spent 6 exhaustive hours carefully scanning every single page of my mother journal and every torn bank statement. I adjusted the contrast and brightness to make sure every forged signature and suspicious routing number was perfectly legible. The digital copies were backed up to 3 separate secure servers. Only when the data was completely locked down did I pick up my phone and call my father. I asked him to come over to my apartment alone. I told him it was about some old photographs I had found in the basement that I needed his help identifying. It was the perfect bait. When Thomas arrived, he looked impatient. He checked his expensive watch the moment he stepped into my living room. "Make it quick, Madeline. Cassandra has a dinner reservation for us at 8, and Brittany needs me to co-sign a lease for her new photography studio." I did not offer him a seat. I did not offer him a drink. I simply turned one of my monitors around so he could clearly see the high-resolution scan of my mother's final journal entry. "Read it," I demanded. My voice was stripped of any daughterly affection. My father frowned. He pulled his reading glasses from his breast pocket with an exasperated sigh. He squinted at the glowing screen. I stood back and observed the progression of his user journey. First there was confusion. Then came the sudden, horrified recognition of his late wife's distinct handwriting. Finally, stark, undeniable panic washed over his features. He took a physical step backward. His face flushed a deep, mottled red. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. His voice dropped into a low, threatening register I rarely heard from him. "From the basement you ordered me to clean," I replied, crossing my arms over my chest. "Is it true, Dad? Was Cassandra your mistress while Mom was dying? Did you let her drain Mom private accounts to fund your new life together?" I waited for the breakdown. I expected him to collapse into tears of guilt. I expected a desperate apology from a man caught in the ultimate betrayal of his family. Instead, I witnessed something entirely different. Rather than showing an ounce of remorse for the woman he had been married to for 30 years, my father went straight on the offensive. It was textbook psychological manipulation. "You have absolutely no idea what you are talking about, Madeline," he sneered. He pointed a trembling finger at the glowing monitor. "Your mother was out of her mind with pain and heavy narcotics at the end. She was completely paranoid. The doctors warned us she would hallucinate things. She saw enemies in every shadow. Cassandra was a godsend to this family. She was a dedicated professional who stayed by my side when you and your brother were too busy with your own lives to help care for her." I refused to let his revisionist history stand. I stepped forward, closing the physical distance between us. "She was a professional mistress, Dad," I shot back. I kept my voice steady and completely void of the hysterical emotion he clearly wanted to provoke. "Mom was not hallucinating the bank transfers. I have the statements right here. Hundreds of thousands of dollars vanished into shell companies while she was practically comatose. You stood by and watched your girlfriend drain her life savings. Those were legitimate medical expenses," Thomas shouted. His voice echoed off the high ceilings of my apartment. We paid for experimental treatments. We paid for round-the-clock private nursing care and specialized respiratory equipment. You are a deeply disturbed and ungrateful child, Madeline. You have always been insanely jealous of the happiness Cassandra brought into this empty house. You are trying to destroy my marriage because you are miserable and alone. I reached for a physical printout I had prepared earlier and slammed it down onto the glass coffee table. Experimental treatments do not get wired to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Dad, I said sharply. Private nursing care does not require a $75,000 cashier check made out to a random real estate holding company. I looked at the dates. The largest withdrawals happened the exact week Mom was moved to hospice care. Her medical care was fully covered by her premium insurance policy. I know this because Jason and I reviewed those specific insurance claims 8 years ago. You let Cassandra loot the estate before the will could even be executed. My father stared at the printed spreadsheet on the coffee table. I could see his eyes darting across the highlighted transactions. His chest heaved with heavy, erratic breaths. He was a cornered animal. For a brief second, the facade cracked, and I saw the terrified, weak man underneath. He knew the truth. He had always known the truth. But acknowledging it meant admitting he had allowed his mistress to rob his dying wife. It meant accepting that his entire current life was funded by a grotesque betrayal. Before my father could formulate another pathetic excuse, the electronic lock on my apartment door clicked open. I had forgotten to engage the deadbolt after Thomas arrived. The heavy wooden door swung wide open and Cassandra walked in uninvited. Her designer heels clicked sharply against my hardwood floor. She was wearing a pristine white trench coat and carrying a luxury leather handbag that easily cost more than my first car. She must have tracked my father through his phone location services. Cassandra stopped in the entryway. Her sharp eyes immediately scanned the room. She took one look at the glowing dual monitors displaying my mother journal and then looked at my father's furious, sweating face. As an expert in manipulating social dynamics, she instantly assessed the threat level. I braced myself for a screaming match. I expected her to launch into a vicious tirade to threaten me or deny the allegations. Instead, she executed a masterclass in psychological warfare. She did not panic. She did not yell. Cassandra's eyes welled up with perfectly timed tears. "Oh, Thomas," she whimpered. Her voice broke with an expertly crafted fragility. She let her designer handbag drop to the floor and rushed across the room. She threw her arms around my father and leaned heavily against his chest, as if her legs could no longer support her. Is she making up those awful stories again? The ones about me stealing? My father immediately wrapped his arms around her shoulders, pulling her close. I watched in utter disgust as he stroked her highlighted blonde hair. "I tried so hard, Madeline." Cassandra sobbed, burying her face against my father-tailored suit jacket. "I sat by your mother bed for countless hours holding her hand while she screamed in agony. I bathed her. I fed her. I gave up years of my life to make sure she was comfortable. And this is how you repay me. You twist my dedication into something dirty and evil just because you cannot stand seeing your father happy." Her performance was nauseatingly flawless. She hit every required emotional trigger for a man who desperately needed to believe his own lies. She painted herself as the selfless martyr and framed me as the unhinged villain attacking their pure love. "I told you, honey." Cassandra sniffled, looking up at Thomas with wide, watery eyes. Her grief has made her completely delusional. "I warned you that she was fixating on the past. She needs serious psychiatric help, Thomas. She is not living in reality anymore." "Do not you dare stand in my home and call me delusional," I said, stepping toward them. My fists clenched tightly at my sides. "I have the financial records, Cassandra. I have the limited liability company registrations. You committed federal wire fraud." My father held up his hand, silencing me. His face contorted with a protective rage directed entirely at his own daughter. "I know, sweetheart," he whispered to Cassandra, kissing the top of her head. "I know she is unwell. We are leaving right now." Thomas glared at me as if I were a dangerous stranger who had broken into his home. "Until you get some professional help and apologize to my wife, do not ever contact us again, Madeline." I stood alone and dialed my brilliant sister-in-law Naomi asking for help. Naomi answered on the second ring. I quickly explained the confrontation, keeping my voice steady. I told her about the journal, the bank statements, and my father's blind allegiance to his new wife. Naomi listened quietly, absorbing the data. When I finished, she told me to lock my doors and prepare for retaliation. She warned me that a woman like Cassandra would not just wait around to be exposed. Naomi was absolutely right. Cassandra struck back less than 12 hours later, and her weapon of choice was total character assassination. The preemptive smear campaign began the very next morning. I woke up to my phone vibrating relentlessly. By 7 o'clock, I had 14 missed calls and dozens of text messages from various aunts, uncles, and family friends. I opened a message from my Aunt Patricia. The text was thick with condescending pity. "Madeline, your father told us about your breakdown last night. Please get help, honey. Grief does terrible things to the mind, but attacking Cassandra is not the answer." My stomach twisted. It made me feel physically sick. I opened another message from a family friend who had known my mother for decades. "Madeline, we are all praying for you. There is no shame in seeking psychiatric care. Your parents are incredibly worried about your severe hallucinations." I sat up in bed staring at the glowing screen. Cassandra had moved with terrifying speed. She had spent the entire night calling everyone in my father's social circle, playing the weeping stepmother. I could easily imagine her performance. She probably choked back fake tears as she spun a masterful web of lies, claiming I had lost my grip on reality. By framing me as mentally unstable, she was discrediting me. She knew that if I tried to show anyone the forged bank statements or the journal, they would dismiss it as paranoid delusions. Then came the second wave of the attack. My phone buzzed with an alert from Jason. He sent me a screenshot of an Instagram post. The post was from Brittany. She had uploaded a heavily filtered photo of herself and Cassandra looking somber. The caption beneath the photo was a masterpiece of toxic manipulation and victim blaming. "It is heartbreaking when the people you try to love turn out to be so deeply toxic," Brittany wrote online. "My mother sacrificed her entire youth caring for a terminally ill woman, pouring her heart and soul into a family that was not even hers. Now she is being targeted by a jealous, greedy stepdaughter who wants to destroy our peace just to grab a bigger slice of the inheritance. Mental illness is real, guys, but weaponizing it to extort your family is pure evil. Please send prayers for my parents right now." The comments section was a cesspool of outrage directed entirely at me. Strangers offered unwavering support to them both. They called me an entitled brat, a monster, and a gold digger. I threw my phone onto the bed and paced across my living room. The sheer audacity of the lie was suffocating. Cassandra had drained massive funds from a dying woman, and now her useless daughter was publicly calling me greedy. They were controlling the narrative, shaping public opinion before I could move. They wanted me to feel cornered. They wanted me to lash out emotionally, to post angry rebuttals or call my relatives screaming. If I reacted with anger, it would completely validate Cassandra's claim that I was unhinged and dangerous. I walked into my kitchen and poured a glass of cold water. I forced my breathing to slow down. I am a researcher. I deal with data logic and user patterns. I knew exactly what they were trying to do, and I absolutely refused to play into their hands. I took a deep breath and made a conscious choice to embrace the silence. I walked back into my bedroom, picked up my phone, and turned off all notifications. I let the messages pile up in my inbox, serving as digital evidence of their coordinated harassment campaign. Every lie Cassandra told over the phone, every defamatory post Brittany published online, it was all just rope they were using to hang themselves. They thought they were building a fortress of public opinion to protect their crimes. But a fortress built on federal wire fraud and forged medical documents is nothing but a house of cards waiting for a strong gust of wind. My brother Jason called me later. He was furious, ready to drive over and demand answers. He had seen Brittany post and wanted to publicly tear her apart in the comments. I told him to stand down. I explained that engaging with them now would only fuel the fire Cassandra had started. We needed them to feel safe. We needed them to believe their smear campaign had worked flawlessly, and that I was cowering in my apartment, too ashamed and broken to fight back. Let them talk, Jason. I told him over the phone, keeping my voice perfectly level. Let Cassandra play the victim to the entire country club. Let Brittany soak up the sympathy from her fake followers. They are digging their own graves and they do not even realize I'm holding the shovel. Jason sighed heavily, but agreed to follow my lead. He promised to stay quiet and keep his distance from the estate. After I hung up, I walked over to my desk and woke up my dual monitors. The scanned images of my mother journal and the torn bank statements illuminated the room. Cassandra thought she could erase my credibility by calling me crazy. She thought an Instagram post would protect her from stealing from a dying woman. I was not going to fight her publicly. I was going to fight her with forensic accounting and federal law. When the dust settled, there would be no filter to hide the truth. The following weeks tested the absolute limits of my sanity. The psychological toll of being painted as a deranged, greedy villain by your own father and stepmother is a heavy, suffocating blanket. I would wake up at 3 in the morning with my heart hammering against my ribs, soaked in a cold sweat. The silence in my apartment was deafening. My phone, once a source of connection to my extended family, had transformed into a radioactive object. I kept all notifications muted, but the red notification badges climbed into the hundreds. Relatives I had known my entire life, people who had celebrated my promotions, were now sending me links to local therapists and leaving scathing voicemails about my supposed betrayal. One afternoon, I made the mistake of checking my professional network online. A senior manager at a partner firm who occasionally golfed with my father had abruptly disconnected from me. The smear campaign was not just a family matter anymore. Cassandra was actively trying to scorch the earth around my career. It took every ounce of my self-control to keep my hands away from the keyboard to resist the burning urge to publish the scanned bank statements for the world to see. Premature exposure would give them time to hide the assets. I had to swallow the humiliation. I had to let them think they were untouchable. I channeled every ounce of my rage into my work. As a user experience researcher, my job is to observe human behavior. I analyze how users navigate interfaces where they click what they ignore, and the invisible digital footprints they leave behind. People are creatures of habit. They prefer convenience over security, and Cassandra was no exception. I treated my stepmother and my stepsister as target users in a complex data study. I sat at my desk, surrounded by empty coffee cups, and began building behavioral personas for both of them. Cassandra was arrogant and technically illiterate. Brittany was vain and addicted to public validation. These were fatal flaws in the digital age. I started with open-source intelligence. I dug into public property records, business registries, and tax assessments in Washington state and beyond. I traced the name of the limited liability company I had found on my mother-torn bank statements. The entity was registered to a registered agent service in Delaware, a classic move to hide ownership. But Cassandra was not a criminal mastermind. She was a suburban housewife playing a dangerous game. I knew she would never pay a premium for high-level digital security. I began mapping her digital journey. I searched local public records for any notary public who had signed off on real estate transactions involving my father properties during the time frame of my mother's death. I cross-referenced those dates with the withdrawal dates on the bank statements. A distinct pattern emerged. Every time a massive sum of money was moved out of my mother's private accounts, Cassandra had authorized a new transaction under a completely different shell company. Then I turned my attention to Brittany. If Cassandra was the architect, Brittany was the leaking roof. I ran a comprehensive scrape of Brittany's social media accounts going back exactly 8 years. I downloaded every photo, every caption, every location tag, and every timestamp. I laid this data over the timeline of my mother declining health and the subsequent bank withdrawals. The correlation was mathematically undeniable. On the exact day $50,000 vanished from my mother account, Brittany posted a photo of herself holding the keys to a brand new luxury SUV. The caption read that her amazing mother had surprised her for being such a good daughter. 3 weeks later, when another $30,000 was wired to an offshore account, Brittany suddenly embarked on a month-long luxury vacation to Europe. She tagged her locations at 5-star hotels in Paris and Milan. I cross-referenced the cost of those hotels with the missing funds. The numbers matched the withdrawals with chilling precision. They had not just stolen the money to hoard it, they had flaunted it. They had used my dying mother life savings to fund a fake influencer lifestyle for a girl who had never worked a hard day in her life. The sheer sociopathy of it made my vision blur with anger. I forced myself to remain objective. I was compiling a master dataset. I took screenshots, downloaded property deeds, and mapped out a massive digital flowchart on my wall using string and push pins. It looked like a serial killer investigation board, but it was actually a flawless user journey map of financial fraud. I found the offshore account routing numbers hidden in plain sight. Cassandra had used her own maiden name mixed with my father's birth year for one of the shell company registration emails. It was a lazy, unoriginal password formula. Using basic search techniques, I found that the email address had been used to register a private mailbox just 2 towns over from our family estate. The physical address attached to that mailbox matched the destination address on a $75,000 cashier check. I had them. I had the entire flow of stolen assets mapped out from the moment it left my mother account to the exact second it was spent on designer bags and European vacations. The emotional toll of uncovering these details was brutal. I spent my evenings crying out of pure frustration, mourning the mother who had been robbed while she lay dying. I grieved the father who had allowed it to happen, who had prioritized his mistress over his wife and children. The tears eventually dried up, leaving nothing but cold, calculated resolve. The public humiliation they were putting me through right now was temporary. The social media posts calling me crazy, the relatives looking at me with pity, the whispers at the country club, none of it mattered. I was building an inescapable trap. Every digital footprint I gathered, every timestamp I verified, was another nail in their coffin. I compiled the evidence into a secure, encrypted dossier. The data was raw, irrefutable, and completely devastating. They thought they had successfully isolated me. They thought my silence was proof of my defeat. They had no idea that I was simply waiting for the perfect moment to execute the final phase of the user experience I had designed specifically for their destruction. I closed my laptop, rubbed my tired eyes, and prepared to hand the entire dataset over to the only person who could turn my digital footprints into federal indictments. I grabbed my encrypted flash drive and slipped it into the inner pocket of my heavy winter coat. The air outside was unseasonably cold for Seattle, bringing a biting wind that matched the chill settling deep into my bones. I locked my apartment door behind me, double-checking the brass deadbolt out of pure paranoia. I had scheduled an emergency meeting with Naomi at a highly secure upscale coffee shop downtown. It was a place loud enough to mask our private conversation, but secluded enough in the corner booths to review the financial dossiers without prying eyes. The meeting with Naomi lasted exactly 3 grueling hours. She sat across from me nursing a black coffee while her sharp eyes darted across the data points illuminated on my tablet. As a top-tier forensic accountant, Naomi possessed a clinical detachment that I desperately needed right now. She did not gasp in shock or cry over the betrayal. She simply nodded, her brilliant mind processing the shell companies, the offshore routing numbers, and the undeniable mathematical correlation between Brittany's lavish European vacations and my mother's completely drained medical accounts. When we finally finished reviewing the timeline, Naomi took the flash drive, slipped it securely into her designer purse, and promised she would begin building the official fraud package for federal review by morning. I left the coffee shop feeling an immense weight lift off my shoulders. The gears of justice were finally turning in my favor. But that brief, comforting moment of relief vanished into thin air the second I stepped off the elevator on my floor later that evening. The hallway was incredibly quiet, but something felt immediately and violently wrong. As I approached my apartment, I noticed the heavy wooden door was resting slightly ajar. The solid brass deadbolt I had meticulously locked just hours earlier was destroyed, the doorframe violently splintered and cracked around the metal strike plate. My pulse spiked instantly. The primal instinct of fight or flight flooded my nervous system, making my hands shake. I pushed the door open with the toe of my leather boot, my heart hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. The scene inside my apartment was a masterful display of targeted destruction. This was not a random neighborhood burglary. My expensive flat-screen television was still mounted perfectly on the living room wall. My premium surround sound system sat completely untouched on the wooden entertainment center. Even my expensive jewelry box resting on the bedroom dresser was undisturbed. Instead, the intruder had focused entirely and ruthlessly on my home office and my personal storage spaces. The drawers of my modern desk had been yanked out and violently upended, scattering highlighters, charging cables, and mundane utility bills across the hardwood floor. The heavy metal filing cabinet where I kept my tax returns and old apartment leases was brutally pried open, its contents shredded and tossed aside like worthless garbage. I stepped carefully over the debris, my boots crunching loudly on broken plastic and scattered paper. I moved straight toward my bedroom closet, ignoring the chaos around me. The closet door hung precariously off its hinges. My clothes were thrown haphazardly onto the mattress, but I ignored the mess entirely. I dropped heavily to my knees and reached for the bottom shelf where I had deliberately hidden the thick canvas duffel bag containing my mother's salvaged belongings. The bag was still there, but it had been sliced wide open down the middle with a sharply serrated blade. I plunged my hands into the torn fabric, frantically searching through the old winter sweatshirts and folded sweaters. My fingers grasped at nothing but empty air and loose cotton threads. The wooden jewelry box was gone. My mother's handwritten journals, the torn credit union bank statements, the physical evidence of Cassandra's ruthless betrayal. All of it had been expertly stolen. For a fraction of a second, a wave of pure, agonizing grief hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Those journals were the very last physical connection I had to my mother. Her shaky handwriting, the distinct smell of the aged paper, the desperate final words she had penned before her failing body gave out entirely. They had taken her away from me all over again. I slumped against the closet wall, my breath catching painfully in my throat as the sheer violation of the break-in settled over my shoulders. Then my cell phone buzzed loudly in my pocket. The harsh vibration pulled me sharply out of my momentary despair. I pulled the device out and stared at the glowing screen. I had a new text message. It was from Cassandra. She had bypassed the block I previously placed on her phone number by using a new unregistered burner phone, but her arrogant, venomous tone was absolutely unmistakable. The text message was brief, highly calculated, and dripping with malicious victory. It read, "Do not ever try to dig through the trash in my house again, Madeline. The past belongs exactly where it is buried. I warned you that you were unwell and hallucinating things. Now you have absolutely zero proof of your little conspiracy theories. You are completely empty-handed. Stop embarrassing your father and move on before you end up with nothing at all." I read the text message twice. The adrenaline pumping through my veins suddenly cooled, hardening into a block of solid, unbreakable ice. Cassandra actually thought she had won the war. She had orchestrated a brazen break-in at my apartment, violating my personal sanctuary solely to steal the physical evidence of her massive financial crimes. She genuinely believed that without the original wooden box and the physical bank statements, I was effectively neutralized and silenced. She thought my entire investigation was dead in the water. She had absolutely no idea who she was dealing with. I did not panic. I did not call the local police to report a residential burglary. Reporting the break-in would only tip them off that I was heavily escalating the situation. I needed Cassandra to feel completely secure in her perceived victory. I needed her to believe that her aggressive, thuggish intimidation tactics had successfully terrified me into total submission. A slow, cold smile spread across my face as I stood up from the floor of my wrecked closet. I brushed the drywall dust off my jeans. I looked at the chaotic mess of my home office, the scattered papers, and the empty slashed duffel bag. Cassandra had stolen mere paper. She had stolen rotting wood and fading ink. She was operating in the 20th century, acting like a common thief in a cheap television drama. She fundamentally failed to understand that physical evidence was obsolete. Every single page of those journals, every torn edge of those bank statements, and every hidden routing number had been meticulously scanned, digitally enhanced, and completely verified. The raw data was currently sitting on an encrypted flash drive in the possession of an elite forensic accountant. It was simultaneously backed up on 3 separate secure cloud servers. Her desperate, sloppy theft had accomplished absolutely nothing except adding a potential felony breaking and entering charge to her inevitable federal indictment. I typed out a direct response to the burner number, ensuring my tone sounded appropriately defeated and broken. I wrote, "You win, Cassandra. I am sorry. I will leave you and Dad alone from now on. Please just stay away from me." I hit send, permanently locking in her false sense of security. The bait was perfectly set. I did not stay in my ruined apartment a second longer than necessary. I packed a small overnight bag with essential work clothes and my primary laptop. I navigated the shattered doorframe and walked briskly to the elevator. Once I was safely inside my car in the secured parking garage, I connected my phone to the Bluetooth system and dialed Jason. He answered almost immediately with Naomi speaking in the background. "I need to come over," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "My apartment was broken into tonight. They destroyed my office and slashed the duffel bag in my closet. The original wooden box and all the physical documents are gone." Jason swore loudly. I heard the rustle of movement as he likely grabbed his keys. "I am calling the police, Madeline. Stay in your car. I am driving there right now." "No!" I commanded sharply. "Do not call the police and do not come here." I already sent Cassandra a text message playing the defeated victim. She thinks she won. If we involve the authorities right now, she will panic and start moving the stolen assets to untouchable accounts. We need her to stay arrogant and careless. "I am driving to your house. We are accelerating the timeline." Naomi took the phone from Jason. Her voice was incredibly calm, anchoring the chaotic energy of the moment. "The guest room is ready, Madeline. Drive straight here. Do not make any stops and make sure you are not being followed. I am booting up the secure servers now." 20 minutes later, I pulled into the driveway of their modern townhouse in the Queen Anne neighborhood. Jason was waiting on the front porch. He practically pulled me inside, locking the heavy deadbolt behind us. My brother was vibrating with pure rage, his fists clenched tight enough to turn his knuckles white. He paced the length of their living room, demanding we go confront our father immediately. Naomi walked out of her home office carrying 3 mugs of black coffee. As an elite African-American forensic accountant who routinely dismantled multi-million-dollar corporate embezzlement schemes for breakfast, she was completely unfazed by physical intimidation tactics. She handed me a mug and gave Jason a stern, grounding look. "Anger is a liability, Jason," Naomi said firmly. "Anger makes you sloppy. Cassandra just made a massive tactical error by breaking into Madeline's apartment. She escalated this from a civil dispute over an inheritance to a criminal conspiracy. But we do not fight criminals with screaming matches in the suburbs. We fight them with inescapable mathematical proof. Now bring your coffee and come into the office. It is time to look at the data." I followed her into the workspace. Naomi's home office looked like a miniature intelligence agency. Multiple oversized monitors spanned the length of a solid oak desk. Her network was protected by enterprise-grade firewalls and heavy encryption protocols. She had already plugged in the secure flash drive I gave her earlier that afternoon. The scanned pages of my mother's handwritten journals and the torn bank statements were organized into neat digital folders on the main screen. "Sit," Naomi instructed, pointing to the leather chairs opposite her desk. "Let us break down exactly how your stepmother engineered this theft. She is brazen, but she is incredibly sloppy. People who marry into money usually lack the sophisticated financial literacy required to effectively hide it." Naomi opened the first bank statement. She highlighted a series of transactions with her cursor. "Notice the structuring here." She began, her eyes scanning the columns of numbers with clinical precision. Cassandra did not just transfer the entire balance at once. That would have immediately flagged the internal fraud detection systems at your mother credit union. Instead, she made multiple withdrawals just under the reporting threshold. 10,000 here, 9,000 there. It is a classic money laundering technique called smurfing. Jason leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. But how did she get the money out of Mom's private accounts? Dad did not have legal access to those specific funds until after the probate process, right? Naomi nodded, tapping a specific line on the screen. Exactly. Thomas was not on this account. But Cassandra was living in your house, functioning as a private nurse. She had physical access to Clara checkbooks, her identification documents, and her mail. Look at this digital copy of a cleared check from the second week of October. She magnified the image on the screen, bringing the signature line into sharp focus. My breath caught in my throat. It was my mother's signature, but it was visibly wrong. The loop of the C was too perfectly rounded. The slant of the letters lacked the weak, shaky tremor that characterized my mother's handwriting during those final agonizing weeks on heavy pain medication. That is a forgery, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. Mom could barely hold a pen in October. She certainly did not write that perfectly legible check for $50,000. Naomi typed rapidly on her keyboard, pulling up a side-by-side comparison of a legitimate signature from a previous year. The difference was glaringly obvious. The forgery was actually too pristine. Cassandra tried to copy a signature from an old document without accounting for the physical degradation caused by terminal illness. Naomi explained, a federal handwriting expert will tear this apart in 5 minutes. But the forged checks are only the beginning of the trail. Naomi continued, her fingers flying across the keys as she opened a new window. We need to trace where the funds actually landed. The checks were made out to an entity called Apex Management Solutions. It sounds like a legitimate healthcare provider or a property management firm. But when you pull the corporate registration records in Delaware, you find something incredibly interesting. She brought up a state business registry database. Apex Management Solutions was incorporated exactly 2 weeks before the first fraudulent check was written. The registered agent listed on the incorporation documents is a generic corporate proxy firm in Wilmington. Naomi continued, pointing her pen at the highlighted text on the monitor. This is a deliberate tactic used to shield the actual owners of a business from public scrutiny. But like I said, Cassandra is not a criminal mastermind. She used the same registered agent to establish 2 other shell companies over the next 6 months. One was called Sapphire Holdings, and the other was Horizon Consulting. I watched the screen as Naomi brought up the banking trails associated with these fictional companies. The user journey of the stolen money was becoming sickeningly clear. Cassandra would forge a check from my dying mother account and deposit it into Apex Management Solutions. From there, the funds were immediately broken down into smaller increments and transferred to Sapphire Holdings and Horizon Consulting. It was a digital shell game designed to confuse anyone looking at the surface-level data. But where did the money go after it hit the shell companies? Jason asked. He was leaning so close to the screen his breath was fogging the glass. Naomi tapped a few keys, bypassing another layer of basic security. That is where Cassandra got overly confident. She assumed nobody would ever have the financial authority to look past the domestic transfers. She wired the cleaned funds directly from Horizon Consulting into a private offshore banking account in the Cayman Islands. But she made a fatal error on the wire transfer authorization forms. She listed a secondary notification email address in case the international wire bounced. Naomi clicked open a PDF document showing a wire transfer receipt. Right there in the notification field was an email address that made my blood boil. It was a variation of Cassandra maiden name combined with the zip code of our family estate. The exact same email address she used for her online shopping accounts. The connection was undeniable. We had absolute proof that she was the sole beneficiary of the offshore account holding my mother's stolen medical funds. This is enough for a federal indictment right here, Jason said. His voice was tight with suppressed adrenaline. We take this to the authorities tomorrow and they lock her up. Wait, Naomi said softly. Her eyes were suddenly fixed on a different dataset scrolling rapidly on her right monitor, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. There is an anomaly here. A massive one. I pulled the property tax records for the family estate just to verify the legal chain of title after your mother passed. I wanted to make sure Cassandra had not somehow manipulated the deed itself. The deed is clean. It transferred to Thomas as the surviving spouse. I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding. At least we still have the house, I said. No, you do not, Naomi corrected sharply. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up a complex legal document from the county clerk database. She expanded the file across the center screen. My eyes scanned the dense legal jargon, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what I was looking at. Naomi turned to face me. Her expression was dead serious. 5 days before your mother died, a secondary mortgage was taken out against the family estate. A cash-out refinance loan for exactly $400,000. The room started to spin. That is impossible, I said, gripping the edge of the desk to steady myself. The house was completely paid off 10 years ago. Dad always bragged about owning it free and clear. Furthermore, the house was solely in my mother's name at that point. She inherited it from my grandparents before she even met Thomas. Dad could not legally take out a mortgage on that property without her explicit consent and notarized signature. Naomi nodded grimly. Exactly, Madeline. The property was solely in Clara's name. Thomas had no legal authority to leverage the house. And Clara was entirely bedridden, pumped full of palliative narcotics, and physically incapable of attending a real estate closing during the last week of her life. Yet this document exists. She zoomed in on the final page of the mortgage contract. At the bottom of the page, sitting right next to a fraudulent notary stamp, was my mother's signature. It was the exact same pristine, perfectly rounded forgery we had seen on the stolen checks. Cassandra had not just drained the cash from the bank accounts. She had ruthlessly hollowed out the equity of the house my mother grew up in. She had stolen $400,000 in a single devastating blow. Jason backed away from the desk, running his hands over his face. He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. $400,000, he repeated. Where did that money go, Naomi? Please do not tell me it went to the Caymans too. Naomi traced the loan disbursement details. The bank wired the lump sum directly into a joint account held by Thomas and Clara. But the money did not stay there for more than 48 hours. It was immediately routed into the Apex Management Shell Company. And from there it vanished into the offshore accounts right alongside the medical funds. Cassandra orchestrated a $500,000 heist right under your father's nose while he was busy playing the devoted husband downstairs. Or Dad knew about it and helped her do it. Jason shot back. He is a coward, Madeline. He would absolutely look the other way if it meant he got to keep his new life funded. I stared at the forged signature on the screen. The sheer scale of the sociopathy was breathtaking. Cassandra had orchestrated this massive mortgage fraud knowing my mother was days away from death. She knew that once Clara passed, the estate would transition to Thomas, who would be too blinded by her manipulation or too complicit in her crimes to ever question the missing equity. She had literally stolen the roof over our heads to fund her luxury lifestyle. I felt a cold, calculating calm wash over me. The grief was gone, completely burned away by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. This was no longer just about exposing a mistress. This was about dismantling a criminal enterprise. Cassandra thought she had secured her future by plundering my mother's past. She thought she was untouchable because she had successfully fooled a weak man and intimidated a grieving daughter. Print everything, Naomi, I commanded. My voice was steady and completely devoid of emotion. Print the wire transfers, the shell company registrations, the forged checks, and the fraudulent mortgage deed. We are building a financial guillotine, and Cassandra is going to gladly put her own head inside it. Naomi nodded, a fierce spark of determination in her eyes. I will have the entire dossier compiled and verified by morning. The paper trail is flawless, Madeline. The FBI Financial Crimes Division will salivate over this data. Let them salivate, I said, turning away from the monitors. But they do not get the file yet. Cassandra still thinks she holds all the cards. If we drop this now, she might have time to scramble or flee. I need her to feel incredibly comfortable. I need her to feel like she has utterly defeated me. We have to set the perfect trap. I walked over to the large whiteboard hanging on the opposite wall of Naomi's office. I picked up a black dry erase marker and began sketching out the user journey of our retaliation. I drew a box representing the $400,000 mortgage fraud, linking it directly to the offshore accounts. Every single note on this whiteboard represented a federal charge: bank fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, tax evasion. The mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines for these crimes would ensure Cassandra spent the rest of her natural life in a federal penitentiary. Jason stood beside me, staring at the complex web of financial crimes I was mapping out. He looked from the whiteboard back to the glowing monitors. "She stole our mother legacy," he whispered. His voice was heavy with a dangerous kind of sorrow. "She took everything Mom worked for and used it to buy designer watches and country club memberships." "She took the money, Jason," I corrected him sharply. "She did not take her legacy. Mom legacy is sitting right here in this room. We are going to expose every single lie Cassandra ever told. We are going to strip her of the wealth she stole and the status she craves. We are going to ensure she pays for every forged signature and every stolen dollar." I placed the marker down and looked at my brother and my sister-in-law. The plan was clear. The data was irrefutable. Now we just had to execute the strategy with absolute precision. We needed to push Cassandra into making her final, fatal mistake. We needed her to attack again. But before we could even formulate the exact bait to dangle in front of my stepmother, Naomi held up a hand. Her eyes were locked onto a completely different set of data on her far left monitor. The vibrant green lines of a separate financial tracking software reflected in her glasses. "Madeline," Naomi said, her voice dangerously quiet, "did your mother ever mention setting up educational trusts or 529 plans for you and Jason?" Jason and I exchanged a confused look. "Yes," I replied, stepping back toward the desk. "Mom was obsessed with our education. She started funding those accounts when we were in middle school. She always told us that no matter what happened, our college tuition and early career safety nets were entirely covered. When she passed away, Dad told us the massive medical bills had eaten into those specific accounts. He claimed there was barely anything left to disperse. We ended up taking out massive federal student loans to cover the rest of our degrees." Naomi shook her head slowly. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up a new batch of domestic transfer logs. "Your father lied to you. Clara never touched those educational funds for her medical care. The accounts were fully matured and completely untouched on the day she died. They contained over $250,000. Jason leaned heavily against the back of Naomi's leather chair. "Then where did the money go?" he asked. His voice was thick with a new layer of dread. Naomi highlighted a series of domestic wire transfers dated just 6 months after our mother's funeral. Thomas was the legal custodian of those accounts. Once Clara was gone, he had absolute authorization to manage or disperse the funds. He did not send this money to the Cayman Islands. He liquidated the entire portfolio and moved the cash into a standard checking account at a local Seattle bank. She clicked on the destination routing number, linking it to a public financial directory. The account did not belong to a shell company. It belonged to Brittany. The air in the office grew impossibly thick. I stared at the screen, trying to process the sheer audacity of the crime. Cassandra had not just drained my mother's medical funds and stolen the equity of our childhood home. She had convinced my father to hand over the money my mother had painstakingly saved for our education and handed it directly to her spoiled, entitled daughter. Naomi cross-referenced the bank account with the social media scraping data I had compiled earlier. The timeline aligned with sickening perfection. Brittany's timeline of luxury purchases spiked exponentially the exact same week the college funds were deposited into her private account. "Let us look at how Brittany funded her sudden career as a lifestyle influencer," Naomi said, her tone laced with absolute disgust. She opened a side-by-side window displaying Brittany's Instagram feed next to the stolen funds ledger. "Here is a withdrawal for $12,000. Naomi pointed to the screen. 2 days later, Brittany posts a video tour of her new luxury apartment in downtown Seattle, boasting about signing a lease she supposedly paid for with her brand partnership deals. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. "Dad co-signed that lease," I said, remembering his impatient comment in my living room just hours ago. He co-signed the lease, but Brittany paid the rent using the money Mom saved for my tuition. Naomi kept scrolling through the data points. Here is a transfer for $8,000 to an upscale furniture boutique. The next week, Brittany posts a photo dump of her custom interior design setup. Here is $15,000 sent to a luxury car dealership for a down payment on a Range Rover. Brittany captions the photo claiming hard work and manifesting your dreams really pays off. Jason let out a sound that was half laugh and half snarl. She manifested a Range Rover using my student debt. He paced across the room, running his hands aggressively through his hair. I spent 5 years eating instant noodles and working night shifts at a warehouse to pay off my loans, while Brittany was driving around in a luxury car bought with my inheritance. Dad looked me in the eye and told me to be a man and pay my own way. He watched me struggle while he handed my future to his stepdaughter. The psychological cruelty was almost harder to swallow than the financial theft. My father had actively watched his own biological children take on crippling debt. He had lectured us on financial responsibility and independence, all while bankrolling Brittany delusional influencer persona, using the exact funds our dying mother had set aside to protect us. Cassandra had completely reprogrammed him. She had convinced him that her lazy daughter deserved the world, while his own children deserved nothing but struggle. This was not just about greed, this was about erasing Clara completely. Cassandra wanted to wipe out every trace of my mother legacy and replace it with her own bloodline. She wanted to build an empire for Brittany, using the bricks my mother had laid for Jason and me. I looked at the photos of Brittany posing in designer clothes, holding expensive handbags, and sipping champagne at exclusive beach clubs. Her entire public identity was a complete fabrication financed by wire fraud and emotional manipulation. She built a massive online following by projecting an image of self-made success, when in reality she was nothing more than a parasitic leech feeding off a dead woman's savings account. She is the weak link, I said, my UX researcher mind locking onto the vulnerability in their operation. Naomi looked up from the screens. What do you mean? Cassandra is careful with her digital footprint. I explained, pacing the length of the room. She uses shell companies and offshore routing numbers. She tries to hide her tracks. But Brittany is addicted to public validation. She documents every single dollar she spends. She geotags her locations. She posts unboxing videos of items bought with stolen money. Brittany is creating a real-time, publicly accessible ledger of federal crimes. Jason stopped pacing. A dangerous smile slowly crept across his face. She is doing the forensic accounting for us. Exactly, I said. Cassandra thinks she destroyed my investigation by breaking into my apartment and stealing a wooden box. She believes the physical paper trail is the only thing that can expose her. She completely failed to realize that her own daughter has been broadcasting their financial crimes to 50,000 followers for the last 8 years. Naomi's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her eyes gleaming with professional satisfaction. So we do not just hit Cassandra with the offshore tax evasion and the mortgage fraud. We hit Brittany with receiving stolen property and wire fraud conspiracy. We tie her entire fake influencer empire directly to the stolen college funds. We tie them all together, I confirmed. But we need to make Cassandra feel like she is completely in control. We need her to lower her guard entirely. If she thinks I am broken and defeated, she will stop watching her back. She will focus on cementing her status at the country club and preparing for her lavish Mother Day celebration. That is when we finalize the trap. We are going to let them walk right into the grandest stage possible before we drop the floor out from under them. I pulled out my phone, preparing to draft the most humiliating fake apology of my entire life. I had to convince Cassandra that her home invasion had worked perfectly. I had to beg for her forgiveness in front of the entire family. It was time to play my part in the user journey. I pulled out my phone and drafted the text message. I carefully selected words that portrayed me as broken, exhausted, and desperately seeking familial approval. I typed that my stressful career had severely impacted my mental health, causing me to lash out and invent wild conspiracies. I begged for my father's forgiveness and asked Cassandra to find it in her heart to overlook my unacceptable behavior. I pressed send and waited. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone vibrated. Cassandra's reply was predictably patronizing. She wrote that she always knew my high-pressure job in the tech industry was making me unstable and that family always forgives. But beneath her sugary words, the primal instincts of a cornered predator had already been triggered. Cassandra might not have been a digital mastermind, but she possessed the cunning survival skills of a lifelong grifter. She knew that my sudden surrender was completely out of character. Even with the stolen wooden box in her possession, she felt the lingering threat of my intelligence. She decided to strike one more preemptive blow to ensure I was thoroughly neutralized. The next morning, I drove to the sleek glass campus of the Health Tech Corporation, where I worked as a senior user experience researcher. My role involved mapping how patients interacted with our proprietary medical portals. Because our platforms handled highly sensitive medical histories and insurance data, every employee was bound by the strictest federal privacy protocols. Security was our absolute highest priority. I loved my job. It provided my financial independence and validated my intellectual capabilities away from my family's toxic shadow. I parked in my designated spot and rode the elevator to the 12th floor. I expected a standard Wednesday filled with wireframe reviews and user testing sessions. Instead, the moment I stepped off the elevator, I found my department manager waiting for me with a deeply uncomfortable expression. He did not greet me with his usual warm smile. He asked me to leave my bag at my desk and follow him directly to the Human Resources Department on the executive floor. My pulse quickened, but I maintained my professional composure. When we entered the frosted glass conference room, I found the Director of Human Resources sitting next to the Chief Information Security Officer. The presence of the security chief immediately set off alarm bells in my head. "Take a seat, Madeline," the HR director said. Her tone was carefully neutral, entirely devoid of warmth. "We received a highly concerning communication early this morning via our anonymous whistleblower portal." She slid a printed document across the polished mahogany table. I picked it up and scanned the text. It was a detailed anonymous report claiming that I had been exploiting my high-level administrative access to secretly download thousands of confidential patient records onto unencrypted external hard drives. The tipster specifically alleged that I was gathering this sensitive data to sell to third-party marketing firms, a massive violation of federal medical privacy laws that carried severe criminal penalties. "This is an absolute fabrication," I stated firmly. I looked the security chief directly in the eye. "I have never transferred a single byte of patient data outside our secure server environment. You can audit my terminal right now. My access logs will prove this is a complete lie." The security chief nodded slowly. "We are legally obligated to conduct a full forensic audit of your workstation and your network activity," he explained. "However, because the allegations involve federal medical data regulations, company policy dictates that we must take immediate precautionary action while the investigation is underway." The HR director folded her hands on the table. "Madeline, effective immediately, you are placed on administrative suspension pending the results of the internal audit. You must surrender your employee badge, your company phone, and your laptop. You are not permitted to contact any colleagues or access any company systems until further notice." I sat perfectly still, processing the sheer malice of the attack. I knew exactly who had submitted that anonymous tip. Cassandra had orchestrated a brilliant, ruthless strike against my livelihood. She knew she could not fire me herself, so she weaponized my company's strict compliance policies against me. Her strategy was diabolically clear. She wanted to instantly cut off my income and destroy my professional reputation. More importantly, she wanted to completely discredit me. If I went to the police with my forensic accounting evidence against her, she could easily point to my suspension and claim I was just a bitter, disgraced employee facing federal data theft charges, lashing out with fabricated financial documents. It was a stunningly effective maneuver designed to trap me in a burning building while she walked away unscathed. I did not argue with the HR director. I did not raise my voice or launch into wild accusations about my wicked stepmother framing me. Acting erratic or emotional would only make me look guilty. Instead, I calmly unclipped my corporate badge from my lapel and placed it on the table alongside my company-issued phone. I understand you have to follow protocol, I said, keeping my voice remarkably steady. I welcome the forensic audit. It will definitively prove my innocence. I look forward to returning to my team once my name is completely cleared. Security escorted me out of the building. I walked through the modern lobby with my head held high, ignoring the curious glances from passing colleagues. I stepped out into the crisp Seattle morning and walked toward the parking garage. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from a profound, terrifying rage. Cassandra had just escalated our Cold War into a fully armed conflict. She had tried to steal my mother's legacy, and now she was actively trying to destroy mine. I got into my car, locked the doors, and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I took 3 deep, controlled breaths, forcing the anger down into a cold, compressed box inside my chest. Then I pulled out my personal cell phone and dialed my brother's wife. Naomi answered immediately, her voice sharp and alert. "Tell me you have the federal dossier ready," I demanded, skipping any standard greeting. "It is finalized and fully encrypted," Naomi confirmed, her tone shifting into her professional forensic accountant mode. "The data trail is absolutely bulletproof." "What happened, Madeline?" "Cassandra just tried to get me indicted for federal data theft," I replied, pulling out of the parking garage and merging into the heavy downtown traffic. "She submitted a fake anonymous tip to my company. I have been suspended pending a full security audit. She is trying to bleed me dry and ruin my credibility before we can expose her mortgage fraud." I heard Jason swearing loudly in the background over the phone line. Naomi let out a low, calculating hum. "She is accelerating her timeline because she is terrified of you, Madeline. She thinks hitting your career will force you to retreat." "She is wrong," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "She just made it personal. We are not just going to report her to the authorities anymore. We are going to humiliate her so profoundly that she will beg the federal agents to arrest her just to escape the embarrassment. I am coming over right now. It is time to set the final trap." I pulled into Jason and Naomi's driveway. My heart was no longer racing. The initial shock of the suspension had completely evaporated, replaced by a hyper-focused clarity. I walked through their front door and headed straight for Naomi's home office. Jason was pacing the floor while Naomi sat at her multi-monitor command center, the encrypted financial dossier gleaming on her center screen. I dropped my bag on the sofa and turned to face them both. "Cassandra thinks she just delivered the kill shot," I said. "She believes getting me suspended will cut off my resources and discredit me. We need to lean into her delusion immediately. If she senses even a fraction of resistance from me, she might panic and start transferring those offshore funds into crypto or something harder to trace. We need to freeze her in a state of absolute victory." Naomi spun her chair around. She crossed her arms and studied my face. "How exactly do we do that, Madeline? Cassandra is paranoid and vicious. She will be waiting for your counterattack." "That is exactly why I am not going to attack," I replied. "I am going to surrender. I am going to give her exactly what she wants most in this world: public submission. I am going to craft an apology so utterly pathetic and humiliating that her narcissistic ego will not be able to resist swallowing it whole. She needs to feel like a god. She needs to believe her little corporate sabotage broke me completely." Jason stopped pacing and stared at me. "Are you serious? You want to beg that monster for forgiveness after she stole Mom's money and tried to ruin your career?" "Yes," I said firmly. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and unlocked the screen. In user experience research, we call this the path of least resistance. You guide the user exactly where they want to go so they never realize they are walking into a confined framework. Cassandra wants me defeated. I will give her the best performance of a defeated daughter she has ever seen. I opened the family group chat. The chat included my father, Cassandra, Brittany, Jason, and myself. It had been completely silent since my father stormed out of my apartment days ago. I took a very deep breath and began typing. I had to swallow my pride and channel the frightened, broken girl they always wanted me to be. "Dad and Cassandra." I typed slowly, making sure to use the formal, deferential tone they demanded. "I am writing this to formally and deeply apologize for my horrific behavior over the past week. I have been under an immense amount of pressure at work recently. I was actually suspended this morning pending a security audit because stress severely compromised my professional judgment. Losing my access and facing these allegations made me realize how far I have fallen. I was projecting my own failures and my unresolved grief onto your marriage. I was paranoid and angry at my own life, and I lashed out at you with baseless, crazy accusations. I paused and read the paragraph aloud to Jason and Naomi. Jason looked physically nauseated. Naomi gave a slow, impressed nod. Keep going, Naomi instructed. Feed her ego. Make her the savior. I looked back at the screen and continued typing. Cassandra, you were right. My grief and my demanding job made me completely delusional. I invented those horrible stories because I was jealous of the beautiful, stable family you built with Dad. You cared for my mother when she was dying, and I repaid your ultimate kindness with slander. I am entirely at fault. I am hitting rock bottom right now. My entire reputation is ruined, and I am terrified of losing my family too. Please find it in your heart to forgive me. I will do absolutely anything to make this right and prove that I can be a respectful part of this family again. I am so sorry. I stared at the blinking cursor. Hitting send on a message like that felt like drinking poison. Every single word was a betrayal of my mother's memory and an insult to my own dignity. But it was a necessary sacrifice. I hovered my thumb over the send button. Jason stepped forward and put a hand on my shoulder. You do not have to do this, Madeline. We have the wire transfer logs. We can just go straight to the federal authorities right now. No, I said, staring at the screen. If we just hand the file to the authorities, the investigation could take months behind closed doors. Cassandra would have time to hire elite defense attorneys. She would spin a narrative of a misunderstood family loan. We need her caught dead to rights in public, surrounded by the very high society peers she wants to impress. We need her locked in place for Mother's Day. I pressed send. The message appeared in the group chat, a massive block of groveling text. The digital silence in the room was deafening as we waited. I watched the delivery receipts change to read. My father read it first, then Brittany, then Cassandra. I pictured my stepmother sitting in her lavish living room reading my pathetic apology. I pictured the triumphant smirk spreading across her face. I pictured her showing the screen to my father, proving once and for all that she was the righteous victim, and I was the unstable, jealous daughter. By taking the blame for the work suspension she secretly caused, I gave her the ultimate alibi. She would feel like an untouchable mastermind. This is exactly how you play the long game, I told Jason and Naomi, setting my phone face down on the desk. You let the enemy think they have a winning hand right up until the moment you flip the board entirely. Now we wait for her to name her price for my redemption. The phone lay silent on Naomi's desk for what felt like an eternity. Jason paced the length of the room again, the tension rolling off his shoulders in waves. Naomi kept her eyes glued to the screen, tracking the offshore accounts, completely unfazed by the agonizing wait. Finally, the screen lit up. A notification pinged loudly in the quiet room. Cassandra had replied to the group chat. I picked up the phone. My eyes scanned the text message. It was a masterpiece of narcissistic manipulation. Madeline, Cassandra wrote, Your father and I have discussed your message. We are both deeply hurt by the vicious lies you spread and the chaos you tried to bring into our peaceful home. Mental health struggles are no excuse for trying to destroy a marriage. However, as I have always said, family is the most important thing in the world. I have spent years trying to be a mother to you. I am willing to forgive your delusions and welcome you back into the fold, but trust must be rebuilt. Words are cheap. We need to see real action to prove that you are genuinely remorseful and ready to respect this family. I read the text aloud to Jason and Naomi. Jason scoffed, his face twisting in disgust. She is actually lecturing you on trust and respect after forging Mom's signature on a $400,000 mortgage document. Wait for the demand, Naomi said, not looking up from her monitors. She is teeing up the extortion. What does she want? Before I could even reply to Cassandra, a second text bubbled up on the screen. It was from my father. Madeline Thomas wrote, Your stepmother is being incredibly gracious. If you truly want to make amends and prove you are committed to this family, you can start by handling the upcoming Mother's Day celebration. Cassandra has reserved the private dining room at the Emerald Country Club for this Sunday. She invited 15 of my key business partners and our extended relatives to celebrate her foundation work. The bill will be exactly $5,000. You will cover the entire tab as a gesture of your apology and respect. If you can do this, we will see you on Sunday at noon. If not, do not bother contacting us again. A sharp bark of laughter escaped my lips. I looked at Jason, who was staring at the phone in absolute disbelief. $5,000, Jason said, his voice rising in disbelief. They want you to pay $5,000 for a country club brunch to apologize for catching them stealing mom money. The sheer audacity of these people is actually terrifying. It is not just audacity, Naomi corrected, her fingers flying across her keyboard. It is a power play. Cassandra wants to financially dominate Madeline. She knows Madeline just got suspended from her job without pay. Demanding a $5,000 dinner is Cassandra's way of forcing Madeline to drain her personal savings. She wants Madeline broke compliant and publicly kissing the ring in front of Thomas' business partners. And I am going to do exactly that. I said, my voice cold and resolute. I typed a rapid response into the group chat, laying the desperation on as thick as possible. Thank you so much, Dad and Cassandra. I typed, I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I gladly accept. I will head to the Emerald Country Club right now to settle the entire bill and finalize the menu. I promise Sunday will be a Mother Day you will never forget. Cassandra reacted to the message with a simple red heart emoji, the ultimate sign of a victorious narcissist. I grabbed my coat and my purse. I need to go to the club and swipe my card in person, I told them. If I just do it over the phone, Cassandra might try to call the events coordinator and retain control of the booking. By paying the invoice in full and acting as the official financial host of the event, I secure the legal right to control the venue. I need to make sure the private dining room is fully accessible for when the federal agents arrive. Drive carefully. Naomi said, her eyes locked on a new spreadsheet of wire transfers. I will have the final financial fraud dossier packaged and ready for the authorities by the time you get back. The drive to the Emerald Country Club took 30 minutes. The club was a sprawling estate of manicured green lawns, massive stone pillars, and valet parking. It was the exact kind of pretentious, exclusionary environment that Cassandra thrived in. I parked my car and walked into the grand lobby, my boots clicking against the imported marble floors. I approached the front desk and asked to speak with the private events coordinator. A polished woman in a crisp suit appeared a few minutes later. She smiled politely. How can I help you today? I am Madeline Thomas' daughter. I explained, maintaining a bright, cheerful demeanor. My father and my stepmother, Cassandra, have a reservation for the private dining room this Sunday for Mother Day. I am here to settle the entire invoice in advance as a surprise for them. I want to take care of everything. The coordinator's smile widened into something much more genuine. Oh, that is incredibly generous of you, Madeline. Let me pull up the file. She typed on her tablet for a moment. Yes, here it is. A private brunch for 20 guests, including premium champagne service and a custom floral arrangement. The total comes to $5,250. Perfect, I said, pulling my heavy metal credit card from my wallet and handing it to her. Please charge the full amount. And since I am paying, I would like to be listed as the primary host on the account. I want to make sure there are no issues with guest access or security clearances on Sunday. We might have some unexpected VIPs arriving, and I want to ensure they are let right into the dining room without any hassle at the front gate. Of course, the coordinator said smoothly, running my card through the machine. You are now listed as the primary host. The security gate will be instructed to allow all of your guests directly through to the private dining wing. Is there anything else you need? Just a copy of the receipt, I replied. I signed the merchant copy, leaving a generous tip for the serving staff, who would have to endure Cassandra's insufferable behavior on Sunday. I folded the heavy cardstock receipt and slipped it into my pocket. Walking back to my car, I felt an intense, burning satisfaction. $5,000 was a steep price to pay, but in the grand scheme of things, it was the cheapest ticket to front row seats for the greatest show of my life. By putting my name on the event contract, I had essentially legally rented the space. I ensured that when Naomi Federal contacts moved in, Country club security could not deny them entry or delay them at the gates to warn the members. The stage was officially set, the venue was locked down, the audience of elite business partners and wealthy relatives was confirmed. Cassandra had demanded a lavish coronation, but I had just bought her a public execution. I drove back to Jason and Naomi House as the gray Seattle sky began to darken into a heavy rain-soaked evening. When I walked back into the home office, the atmosphere had shifted. The chaotic energy of discovery was gone, replaced by a lethal quiet efficiency. Naomi had finished. Sitting on the center of her massive oak desk was a thick black binder. It looked entirely unassuming, just a standard office supply object. But inside that binder was the culmination of Cassandra absolute destruction. It contained the certified digital copies of my mother journal, the highlighted records of the offshore wire transfers, the proof of the shell companies, and the glaringly obvious forged signatures on the $400,000 mortgage deed. It also contained the meticulous tracking of the stolen college funds, routed directly to Brittany Vanity lifestyle accounts. Naomi leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "The trap is armed, Madeline," she said, her voice a low, steady rumble of authority. "I used my secure portal to flag this directly to a contact I have inside the FBI Financial Crimes Division, bypassing the standard intake delays. I also flagged the offshore movements to the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit. When dealing with wire fraud of a dying person estate coupled with massive tax evasion, the federal government moves with terrifying speed." "So what happens now?" Jason asked, staring at the black binder as if it were a loaded weapon. "Now," I said, reaching out to touch the smooth cover of the binder. "We prepare for Sunday. We let Cassandra put on her diamonds. We let her gather her high society friends. We let her sit at the head of that table feeling like the queen of the world. And then we hand her the bill." The days leading up to Sunday were a masterclass in psychological compartmentalization. Cassandra was completely intoxicated by her perceived victory. She spent Friday and Saturday bombarding the family group chat with an endless stream of demands and updates regarding her Mother Day brunch. She uploaded photos of her outfit fittings, complained about the floral arrangements not having enough white orchids, and sent me a strict schedule outlining exactly when I was expected to arrive, and apologized to my father business partners. I responded to every single message with cheerful obedience. I told her the orchids had been upgraded. I promised my public apology would be sincere and thorough. Every submissive text I sent was a psychological sedative, lulling her into absolute complacency. While she was busy agonizing over seating charts and high society optics, Naomi, Jason, and I transformed the townhouse into a forensic war room. Naomi had already flagged the offshore movements to her federal contacts, but creating the physical presentation for Sunday required another layer of meticulous preparation. We needed the tangible evidence to be so visually devastating that Cassandra could not spin it or deny it in front of an audience. Naomi printed the final tax evasion analysis on thick, high-quality legal paper. "This is where the federal government will completely destroy her," Naomi explained, tapping a red pen against a printed tax return from the year my mother died. Cassandra was not just moving stolen money. She was aggressively hiding it from the Internal Revenue Service. When she routed that $400,000 mortgage cash out through her shell companies, she failed to declare a single cent of it as income or a taxable gift. The IRS does not play games with offshore tax evasion. They will freeze every domestic account tied to her Social Security number the moment they process this specific file. Jason stood by the printer collecting the warm sheets of paper. "What about Brittany influencer funds? The money stolen from our college accounts?" Naomi handed him another stack of documents. "Brittany is guilty of receiving stolen property, but she is also guilty of massive tax fraud. She has been claiming the stolen tuition money as legitimate business revenue for her lifestyle brand. We have packaged the wire fraud evidence directly alongside her fraudulent tax filings. The feds will seize her car, her designer bags, and the lease on her apartment to cover the back taxes and penalties before she even sees a courtroom." I took the freshly printed documents from Jason and walked over to the dining table. It was time to package the evidence. If Cassandra wanted a lavish, unforgettable Mother Day gift, I was going to deliver a flawless user experience. I had purchased a large custom-made gift box from a luxury boutique downtown. It was wrapped in rich navy blue velvet with a heavy magnetic clasp. Inside, I carefully laid down a bed of pristine white silk. It looked exactly like the packaging for a high-end designer handbag. Are we really putting the federal evidence inside a velvet box? Jason asked, a dark, cynical smile forming on his face. Presentation is everything, I replied, smoothing out the silk lining. Cassandra operates entirely on optics. She will expect something expensive. She will want to open it in front of everyone to show off how much financial control she has over me. The unboxing experience has to feel incredibly luxurious, right up until the exact millisecond she reads the first line of text. I began assembling the documents. At the very bottom of the box, I placed a high-resolution color copy of the forged mortgage deed. The fake signature stood out glaringly against the white paper. On top of that, I placed the offshore wire transfer receipts, highlighting the Cayman Islands routing numbers and the email address utilizing her maiden name. Next went the shell company registration forms exposing Apex Management Solutions and Sapphire Holdings. Then came the tax evasion summaries Naomi had just printed, stamped with bold red letters indicating federal violations. Finally, resting at the very top of the stack, waiting to be the first thing she saw, was the copy of my mother's final journal entry. The pale yellow paper and the shaky, desperate handwriting were perfectly preserved in the high-definition scan. I closed the velvet box. The magnetic clasp snapped shut with a heavy, satisfying click. It is perfect, Naomi said quietly, standing beside me. She will never see it coming. She thinks she is going to a coronation, Jason added, staring at the navy blue velvet. She has no idea she is walking into an ambush. My phone buzzed on the table. It was another message from Cassandra in the group chat. She wanted to remind me that the dress code was country club formal and that I should make sure my hair was professionally styled so I did not embarrass my father. She ended the message with a smiley face emoji. I typed back a swift confirmation, assuring her I would look perfectly appropriate for the occasion. The audacity is breathtaking, Jason muttered, reading the text over my shoulder. She ruined our mother's final days, stole our future, and she is worried about your hair. Let her worry about the dress code, I said, sliding my phone back into my pocket. By tomorrow afternoon, she will be trading her designer dresses for a federal jumpsuit. The preparation was complete. The financial dossier was organized, the digital backups were locked on servers, and the physical evidence was packaged in a velvet box. Naomi spent the evening coordinating with her federal contacts. Because the evidence of wire fraud and tax evasion was overwhelmingly concrete, the authorities moved with unprecedented speed. The trap was a coordinated federal sting operation. I left Jason's house carrying the velvet box. The anxiety of the past week had vanished. I was the architect of their downfall, setting the alarm, falling into dreamless sleep, ready for tomorrow. I woke up on Sunday morning with absolute clarity. The heavy rain from the previous night had completely stopped, leaving the Seattle skyline looking washed and crisp against the pale morning light. I walked into my kitchen and poured a cup of black coffee. As I looked at the navy blue velvet box sitting innocently on my granite countertop, I thought about the sheer magnitude of what Naomi had accomplished over the past 48 hours. Getting federal agencies to move on a weekend is practically impossible. Bureaucracy is a massive, bloated machine designed to move slowly. Normal fraud investigations take months or even years of preliminary audits, subpoena requests, and endless red tape before a single badge flashes at a suspect door. But Naomi was not a normal citizen submitting a tip through a generic online portal. She was an elite forensic accountant who had spent the last decade building an ironclad reputation with federal prosecutors. She knew exactly how to bypass the standard user journey of the federal justice system. On Friday afternoon, while Cassandra was busy sending me demanding text messages about the country club dress code, Naomi had bypassed the intake bureaucracy entirely. She picked up her secure line and dialed a direct extension for an active task force commander within the Federal Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Division. Naomi had previously collaborated with his unit on a massive corporate embezzlement case involving a multinational logistics firm. She possessed the security clearance and the professional credibility required to get a federal agent on the line within 60 seconds. I sat in her home office and listened as she pitched my stepmother financial execution. Naomi did not lead with emotion. She led with undeniable structured data. She outlined the fraudulent medical fund draining the $400,000 mortgage fraud using a forged signature and the immediate offshore routing of the stolen assets to the Cayman Islands. The federal agent was initially hesitant. They were flooded with high-profile cases, and a domestic inheritance dispute usually fell outside their immediate jurisdiction. But Naomi knew exactly which trigger words would force the federal machine into overdrive. She explicitly mentioned the utilization of domestic shell companies to obscure the origin of the funds. She named Apex Management Solutions and Sapphire Holdings. She provided the exact routing numbers connecting domestic banks to the offshore accounts. The moment she confirmed that the stolen cash crossed international borders to evade taxation, it ceased to be a family dispute. It instantly became a federal wire fraud and money laundering conspiracy. Then Naomi delivered the fatal blow. She looped in a contact at the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Unit. She presented the digital footprint of Britney fake influencer empire. She provided the routing numbers proving that over $250,000 of stolen educational trust funds were deposited directly into Britney personal accounts. She detailed how Britney was publicly claiming those stolen funds as legitimate business revenue for her lifestyle brand, while failing to pay a single cent of federal income tax on the stolen money. The IRS does not take kindly to influencers flaunting untaxed wealth on public platforms. Naomi provided the exact tax code violations Britney had committed, guaranteeing that the agency would place an immediate levy on all of her known bank accounts. Britney was going to lose her luxury vehicle and her downtown apartment before she even realized she was under investigation. Federal agencies operate on risk and reward. Naomi handed them a perfectly wrapped, trial-ready prosecution. She had done all the heavy lifting. The forensic accounting was flawless. The paper trail was completely transparent. There was no need for a lengthy preliminary investigation because Naomi had already compiled the evidence to a standard that exceeded federal requirements. The turning point happened late Friday evening. Naomi Federal Contacts ran a preliminary cross-check on Cassandra's social security number and the offshore routing data Naomi provided. The algorithms immediately flagged a massive anomaly. Cassandra had grown paranoid. While she was publicly acting victorious and demanding I pay for her lavish Mother Day brunch, she was secretly initiating transfers to move the remaining stolen equity deeper into untouchable offshore accounts. She was actively preparing to liquidate the remaining domestic assets and completely abandon my father with the impending mortgage debt. That active transfer triggered an emergency response protocol. Cassandra was no longer just a passive suspect. She was an active flight risk engaged in ongoing money laundering. By Saturday morning, Naomi had facilitated a secure video conference between her federal contacts and the United States Attorney Office. They reviewed the scanned copies of my mother journal, the forged mortgage deed, and the shell company incorporation documents. The evidence of the forged signature was so blatantly obvious that a federal judge authorized an emergency asset freeze and issued the arrest warrants by Saturday afternoon. Normally, law enforcement would execute a warrant at a suspect residence during the early morning hours. But Naomi and I had specifically engineered a different outcome. I had intentionally paid the $5,000 invoice for the private dining room at the Emerald Country Club. By putting my name on the contract as the primary host, I became the legal leaseholder of that private space for the duration of the event. I officially authorized law enforcement to enter the venue. This completely bypassed the notoriously strict security protocols of the private country club. The private security guards at the front gate were legally powerless to stop the federal convoy. The club management could not block the federal agents or delay them at the gates to warn Cassandra because the legal host of the event had explicitly granted them unfettered access. It was a flawless loophole. Naomi had perfectly synchronized the arrival of the authorities. The federal agents were scheduled to breach the private dining room at exactly 1:15 in the afternoon. That gave me exactly 1 hour and 15 minutes to sit through the brunch, endure Cassandra's insufferable boasting, and deliver the velvet box. I finished my coffee and walked over to my closet. I bypassed the casual attire and pulled out a sharply tailored charcoal gray suit. I wanted to look like the successful professional I actually was, not the broken daughter Cassandra desperately wanted me to be. I applied my makeup with steady hands, locking my emotions away behind a mask of calm anticipation. My phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. It was a text message from Jason. He and Naomi were already en route to the country club. They would be waiting in their car parked just outside the main gates, watching the federal vehicles stage their approach. Jason had promised to record the entire arrival for my personal viewing pleasure. I slipped my phone into my pocket, grabbed my car keys, and carefully picked up the heavy velvet box from the kitchen counter. The magnetic clasp held the devastating truth securely inside. Everything was perfectly aligned. The trap was armed. The federal agents were briefed and ready. Cassandra was currently sitting in front of her vanity mirror, fixing her hair, completely oblivious to the fact that her entire reality was about to violently collapse. I walked out of my apartment and headed for my car, ready to give my stepmother the most unforgettable gift she had ever received. The drive to the Emerald Country Club was an exercise in supreme emotional control. I gripped the leather steering wheel of my sedan, acutely aware of the heavy navy blue velvet box resting on the passenger seat. Every traffic light, every turn, every passing vehicle felt amplified. I was an architect watching the final stress test of a towering structure. I mentally retraced every single step of the user journey I had designed for Cassandra. The velvet box was not just a container, it was a psychological weapon engineered for maximum devastation. Before leaving the apartment, I had spent an hour perfecting the internal layout of that box. I applied my professional user experience principles to the arrangement of the forensic documents. The visual hierarchy had to be absolute. When Cassandra lifted the lid, her eyes would naturally gravitate to the center. That was where I placed the high-resolution scan of the forged $400,000 mortgage deed. I had used a subtle red overlay to highlight the fraudulent notary stamp and my mother's falsified signature. Beneath that, the offshore wire transfer routing slips were arranged in chronological order, mapping the exact flow of stolen money to the Cayman Islands. I wanted Cassandra to experience a specific sequence of cognitive shocks. First, confusion. Second, recognition. Third, the terrifying realization that her federal crimes were entirely documented. And finally, total systemic panic. To ensure the trap was completely inescapable, I had added one final touch to the bottom of the box. I printed out the federal statute definitions for wire fraud, bank fraud, and tax evasion, neatly highlighting the mandatory minimum prison sentences. It was a clean, brutal presentation. I turned onto the long, manicured driveway of the country club. The imposing wrought iron gates loomed ahead. A private security guard stepped out of the booth holding up a clipboard. I rolled down my window and offered a bright, artificial smile. "Good morning," I said smoothly, Madeline checking in for the private brunch in the main dining wing. The guard checked his list and nodded respectfully. Yes. You are the primary host for the event. Everything is set up for you inside. You can proceed directly to the VIP valet." The primary host. The title echoed in my mind like a victory bell. That single logistical maneuver was the linchpin of the entire federal operation. By establishing myself as the financial sponsor and the legal leaseholder of the private room, I had completely neutralized the country club elite security protocols. When Naomi contacts arrived, the guards would have no legal authority to stop them at the gate. I handed my keys to the valet and retrieved the velvet box. The lobby of the Emerald Country Club was a masterclass in aggressive wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over imported marble floors. Wealthy patrons mingled in designer suits and expensive silk dresses. The air smelled of fresh lilies and old money. I walked past the grand staircase, maintaining a steady, confident pace. My heart beat a slow, rhythmic drum inside my chest. The waiting game was excruciating, but I embraced the tension. I approached the heavy double doors of the private dining room. The events coordinator I had met days earlier greeted me with a warm, professional smile. "Everything is ready, Madeline," she whispered, gesturing to the lavish setup inside. "We have arranged the seating exactly as requested. The floral centerpieces are fresh, and the champagne is chilling. Your guests should begin arriving shortly." I stepped into the room. The setup was breathtakingly ostentatious, exactly what Cassandra demanded for her grand performance. A massive mahogany table stretched across the center of the room, set for 20 guests. Gold-rimmed crystal glasses gleamed under the recessed lighting. I walked directly to the head of the table. This was Cassandra's designated throne. I placed the navy blue velvet box squarely in the center of her premium place setting. The white silk ribbon tied around the box looked perfectly innocent, an elegant tribute for Mother Day. I checked my watch. It was 11:45 in the morning. The federal agents were scheduled to breach the room at exactly 1:15 in the afternoon. I had exactly 90 minutes to play the role of the submissive, broken daughter. I pulled out my phone and checked my encrypted messaging app. A single text from Jason sat in the secure inbox. "We are parked across the street from the main gates," Jason wrote. "Naomi confirms the convoy is staging 2 miles out. They are ready to roll on your signal." I typed back a swift reply. "The box is on the table. The venue is secure. Maintain your position and keep the cameras ready." I slipped the phone back into my pocket and took a deep breath. The quiet solitude of the dining room was about to be shattered. I mentally locked away every ounce of grief, every ounce of anger, and every memory of my mother's agonizing final days. The image of her pale, fragile hands gripping the bedsheets while Cassandra smirked from the doorway had fueled me for months. But today required absolute detachment. I could not afford to let emotion cloud my judgment now. If Cassandra sensed even a hint of hostility, her survival instincts would kick in. She might refuse to open the box. She might try to leave the premises early. I had to feed her ego until it choked her. I heard the distant sound of approaching voices in the hallway. The sharp, authoritative click of expensive heels echoed against the marble floor. A loud, performative laugh rang out, recognizable instantly. It was the sound of a woman who believed she had conquered the world and crushed her enemies underfoot. Cassandra had arrived. I took my designated seat halfway down the table, folding my hands neatly in my lap. I arranged my features into a mask of pure, submissive defeat. I let my shoulders slump slightly, projecting the image of a woman who had been thoroughly beaten down by a superior opponent. The heavy wooden doors swung open, and the opening act of my revenge officially commenced. The heavy wooden doors swung open, and the opening act of my revenge officially commenced. Cassandra swept into the private dining room like a monarch returning to her conquered kingdom. She wore a tailored ivory pantsuit that screamed expensive taste, and draped over her shoulders was a silk shawl that fluttered as she moved. Her blonde hair was perfectly blown out, catching the ambient light of the crystal chandeliers. She clung to my father's arm, radiating a toxic blend of triumph and artificial grace. Thomas walked beside her, looking every inch the successful patriarch. He wore a navy blazer and a smile that seemed permanently affixed to his face. He nodded to the waitstaff, projecting an air of generous authority. Trailing a few steps behind them was Brittany. My stepsister was dressed in a vibrant designer cocktail dress that she had undoubtedly purchased using my stolen college tuition. She held her phone up at arm length, already broadcasting her arrival to her fake followers on social media. Following the royal family came the guests. These were not just relatives. They were my father's most crucial business associates. I recognized Richard, the chief executive of a major real estate firm, and his wife Margaret, whose family owned half the commercial property in downtown Seattle. There was also David, a venture capitalist who had recently partnered with my father on a massive suburban development project. These were people who valued reputation above all else. They were the exact audience Cassandra needed to validate her social climbing existence. Cassandra stopped at the head of the heavy mahogany table. Her eyes swept across the room, taking in the lavish floral arrangements and the waiting champagne flutes. Then her gaze landed on me. I kept my shoulders slumped and offered a weak, trembling smile. I forced my eyes to look down at the table, perfectly playing the role of the disgraced daughter who had been permitted to attend only through her stepmother, boundless mercy. "Madeline," Cassandra said, her voice carrying a loud, theatrical note of pity. "I am so glad you decided to show up and make things right. It takes real courage to admit when you are struggling." I stood up slowly, keeping my hands clasped in front of me. "Thank you for allowing me to host this brunch, Cassandra," I replied, my voice deliberately soft and submissive. "I wanted to create a beautiful afternoon to celebrate everything you do for this family. I am truly sorry for my recent behavior. Work stress completely clouded my judgment." Cassandra smiled, a predatory, chilling expression. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me in a stiff, performative hug. She leaned close to my ear so only I could hear her whisper. "I told you not to mess with me." She hissed quietly, her expensive perfume making my stomach churn. "Now sit down and behave yourself, or I will have security throw you out." She pulled back and beamed at the watching guests. "Family is everything," she announced loudly to the room. "We all have our difficult seasons, but love always prevails. Now everyone, please take your seats. We have so much to celebrate today." The guests murmured their polite approval and began finding their name cards. I sank back into my chair, completely unfazed by her whispered threat. The country club security worked for me today. She just did not know it yet. As the first round of premium champagne was poured, Brittany immediately took control of the conversation at my end of the table. She completely ignored me, turning her attention to Margaret and the other wealthy wives. Brittany was practically vibrating with the need to boast about her fabricated success. "My lifestyle brand is just exploding right now," Brittany announced, taking a long sip of her mimosa. "I just signed a massive lease for my new creative studio downtown. It has floor-to-ceiling windows and incredible natural light. I am flying to Milan next month to shoot a new campaign for a luxury skincare line. It is exhausting being a self-made entrepreneur, but the hustle is so worth it." Margaret offered a tight, polite smile. "That sounds wonderful, dear. It is always nice to see young people working hard for their money." I took a slow sip of my water, hiding my absolute disgust. Brittany was sitting there bragging about a downtown studio lease that my father had co-signed, and she was paying the rent using the exact educational trust funds my dying mother had set aside for Jason and me. Her upcoming trip to Milan was funded by offshore wire fraud. Every single word coming out of her mouth was a documented federal crime. She was practically reading her own indictment aloud to a table full of venture capitalists and real estate moguls. The sheer irony was intoxicating. I watched the fake smiles of the business partners. They nodded along with Brittany, endless chatter about luxury cars and designer brand deals, clearly viewing her as a spoiled airhead. They tolerated her because of my father's wealth. None of them realized they were sharing a meal with a family actively engaged in a massive money laundering conspiracy. The waitstaff began serving the first course. Plates of smoked salmon and artisanal cheeses were placed gracefully in front of us. The clinking of silver cutlery against fine china filled the room. At the head of the table, Cassandra was holding court. She loudly detailed the charitable work her foundation was supposedly doing, soaking up the admiration of my father colleagues. She was in her absolute element. Sitting directly in front of her, perfectly centered between her crystal water glass and her silver fork, was the navy blue velvet box. It rested there like a silent, ticking time bomb. Cassandra had glanced at it several times, her eyes gleaming with greedy anticipation, but she was deliberately waiting for the perfect moment to open it. She wanted everyone to have their food. She wanted maximum attention before she unveiled the expensive tribute she forced her defeated stepdaughter to buy. I checked my watch discreetly under the table. It was exactly 12:45, 30 minutes until the federal contacts breached the perimeter. The conversation around the table shifted to real estate markets and upcoming investments. My father spoke confidently, boasting about his recent acquisitions, completely unaware that his primary residence was secretly heavily mortgaged by the woman sitting next to him. I ate my salmon, methodically chewing each bite with mechanical precision. I was preserving my energy. Cassandra raised her glass, her diamond-encrusted Rolex catching the light of the chandelier. "Thomas, my love," she said, her voice ringing out to command the room attention once again. "This has been a beautiful morning, but I believe Madeline has something special she wants to present to us." Every eye at the long mahogany table turned toward me. The chatter stopped completely. This was it. Cassandra was ready for her public coronation. She wanted me to verbally submit to her in front of the most powerful people in my father's social circle. She wanted the velvet box opened for everyone to see. I placed my napkin on the table and stood up slowly. I looked directly at Cassandra, meeting her arrogant, expectant gaze. The time for playing the broken victim was officially over. I placed my hands flat on the polished mahogany table and leaned forward just a fraction. The silence in the private dining room was absolute. Every single business partner, wealthy relative, and country club staff member had their eyes locked on me. I looked at the heavy navy blue velvet box resting perfectly in front of my stepmother, Cassandra. I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room. I stripped away the trembling, submissive tone I had used just moments ago. My voice was now sharp, resonant, and completely commanding. "You demanded a gesture of respect. You wanted me to prove my commitment to this family by paying for this extravagant brunch and offering a tribute to your legacy. I have done exactly that. Go ahead and open your gift. The real present is tucked right beneath the white silk lining." Cassandra smiled, basking in the attention of her wealthy audience. She truly believed she had broken me. She reached out with her manicured hands and unclasped the magnetic latch. The heavy lid of the velvet box swung open. She delicately pulled back the pristine white silk, undoubtedly expecting the gleam of a diamond necklace or the keys to a luxury vehicle. Instead, her fingers brushed against a thick stack of high-resolution laminated papers. I watched her eyes focus on the top document. It was the color copy of my mother's final journal entry written on her signature pale yellow stationery. The arrogant, victorious smile on Cassandra's face did not just fade, it shattered. The blood rushed out of her cheeks, leaving her complexion a sickening ashen gray. Her hands began to shake so violently that the velvet box rattled against her crystal water glass. "What is this?" my father asked, leaning over to look inside the box. He sounded more annoyed than concerned, irritated that the gift was not a shiny bauble he could brag about to his venture capitalist friends. Cassandra slammed the lid shut with a loud, sharp crack. She pressed both her hands flat on top of the box, as if trying to physically contain an explosion. "It is nothing," she gasped out. Her voice was thin, reedy, and laced with absolute terror. "Just a tasteless joke. Madeline, you are leaving right now. Security will escort you out. Open the box, Dad," I commanded. My tone was so authoritative that several of his business partners visibly flinched. "Or would you prefer I just tell the entire table what your wife has been doing behind your back?" "Madeline, enough!" Thomas barked, half rising from his chair. "I will not have you ruin this afternoon with your delusions. I told you to get psychiatric help. I paid for this room, Thomas." I shot back, using his first name to shatter the parental dynamic entirely. "I am the legal leaseholder of this event. Security answers to me today. Now either you open that box, or I will read the forensic accounting report out loud to your investors." David, the venture capitalist, sitting halfway down the table, set his champagne flute down with a heavy thud. The wealthy elite have a sixth sense for financial liability, and David clearly smelled smoke. "Thomas," David said cautiously, "what exactly is going on here?" My father hesitated, looking at his business partner, then down at his wife. Cassandra was hyperventilating, her perfectly styled hair trembling as she kept her hands pinned to the velvet lid. But Thomas could not resist the pressure of his peers. He reached over forcefully, grabbed Cassandra's wrists, and pulled her hands away. He flipped the lid open. He bypassed my mother's yellow letter and pulled out the second document in the stack. It was the high-resolution scan of the $400,000 mortgage deed. I watched my father's eyes scan the legal text. His brow furrowed in deep confusion. A cash-out refinance, he muttered aloud, his voice echoing in the dead silent room. A secondary mortgage on the estate. The house has been paid off for 10 years. I never authorized this. Look at the date, Dad. I instructed, my voice ringing out like a judge delivering a sentence. And look at the signature at the bottom of the page. Thomas looked at the date. His face lost all color. This is dated 5 days before Clara died, he whispered. He stared at the signature line. This is Clara's signature. But she was in a coma. It is a forgery, I announced to the entire room. A sloppy amateur forgery executed by your beloved wife. 5 days before my mother died of pancreatic cancer, Cassandra forged her signature to illegally extract $400,000 in equity from the family estate. She routed that stolen cash through 2 domestic shell companies, Apex Management Solutions and Sapphire Holdings, before wiring it directly into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The private dining room erupted into absolute chaos. Margaret, the real estate heiress, gasped loudly and covered her mouth. Richard, the chief executive, immediately pushed his chair back from the table, physically distancing himself from my father. They recognized immediately that this was not a petty family squabble, but a massive federal crime unfolding right in front of them. That is a complete lie, Cassandra shrieked. Her voice was shrill and desperate. She scrambled to grab the papers out of my father's hands, but he yanked them away, his eyes wide with horror, as he flipped to the wire transfer logs I had neatly highlighted in bright red ink. It gets better. I continued, projecting my voice over Cassandra's frantic denials. You did not just steal from a dying woman. You stole from your own stepchildren. That lavish downtown studio Brittany was just bragging about to everyone at this table, the luxury SUV and the upcoming trip to Milan. All of it was funded using the $250,000 my mother painstakingly set aside in educational trust funds for Jason and me. Cassandra convinced you to liquidate those accounts, Dad, and she funneled every single cent directly into Brittany's personal checking account. Brittany dropped her smartphone. It clattered loudly against her fine china plate, cracking the screen. Mom, what is she talking about? Brittany demanded, looking genuinely confused and terrified. For all her vanity, she was entirely oblivious to the criminal mechanics funding her lifestyle. Tell them she is crazy. She is insane! Cassandra screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. Her elegant facade had completely melted away, leaving only a desperate, cornered grifter. Thomas, do not listen to her. She fabricated these documents. She printed them off the internet. She is trying to destroy us because she is a miserable, jealous failure. I am a senior researcher who specializes in tracking user data, I replied coldly, crossing my arms. And my sister-in-law is a forensic accountant who dismantles corporate embezzlement rings for a living. You left a digital footprint so massive it could be seen from space, Cassandra. You used your own maiden name to register the offshore wire notifications. You committed federal bank fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. And Brittany, you have been claiming stolen trust fund money as legitimate business revenue for a fake lifestyle brand which constitutes massive federal tax evasion. Thomas, you have to stop this, Cassandra begged, grabbing my father's arm and trying to shake him out of his shock. But Thomas was completely paralyzed. He stared at the wire transfer logs, the shell company names, and the undeniably forged signature of his late wife. The reality of his willful blindness was finally crashing down on him. He had traded his loyal wife and his children for a woman who had systematically robbed his entire family blind. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a pathetic, desperate realization of his own ruin. Madeline, my father choked out, his voice barely a whisper. What have you done? I did exactly what you told me to do, Dad. I said, a cold, victorious smile finally breaking across my face. You told me to bag up the trash in the basement. I just decided to bring the trash into the light. Cassandra lunged forward, grabbing a heavy crystal water pitcher from the table. Her face was contorted with violent, unfiltered rage. "I will kill you!" she shrieked, preparing to hurl the heavy glass directly at my head. But before she could even raise her arm, a loud, authoritative commotion erupted from the grand hallway outside our private dining room. The heavy wooden doors, which I had legally secured as the host of the event, were suddenly and violently thrown open. The sound of heavy tactical boots marching against the polished marble floor echoed through the space, instantly freezing everyone in the room. 4 men and 2 women, wearing dark windbreakers, with FBI stenciled in bold yellow letters, stepped into the private dining room. They were flanked by 3 uniformed local police officers. The heavy crystal water pitcher slipped from Cassandra's hands and shattered violently against the mahogany table. Water and sharp shards of glass exploded across the fine china and expensive floral arrangements. Thomas finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. His face turned a dangerous shade of crimson as he stepped in front of Cassandra. He attempted to project the authority of a wealthy patriarch who was used to controlling every room he entered. "What is the meaning of this?" Thomas bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at the lead agent. "This is a private event at an exclusive club. You have absolutely no jurisdiction to barge in here and disrupt my family. Madeline, call off whatever insane prank this is right now." I did not say a single word. I simply stepped back and crossed my arms. I let the federal justice system do exactly what Naomi had programmed it to do. The lead agent completely ignored my father. He did not ask for permission, and he certainly did not care about the country club dress code. He stepped carefully around the shattered crystal and looked directly at my stepmother. "Cassandra," the agent said, his voice cutting sharply through the dead silence of the room. Cassandra shrank back against the edge of the table. Her pristine ivory pantsuit was now soaked with spilled water from the broken pitcher. She looked frantically at the wealthy business partners, hoping someone would intervene and save her. But Richard David and their wives were already edging toward the exits. They were desperate to avoid being associated with a federal raid. Thomas tried to shout again, his voice cracking with desperate rage. "I demand to speak to your superior. I will have your badges for this intrusion." Before he could finish his threat, the piercing wail of multiple police sirens erupted from the courtyard directly outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated Cassandra's pale, terrified face. The cavalry had officially arrived to secure the perimeter. "You are under arrest for federal bank fraud, wire fraud, and tax evasion," the lead agent announced, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "We have a federal warrant for your immediate detention regarding the fraudulent transfer of assets." "No!" Cassandra shrieked as 2 officers moved in and grabbed her arms. "It was a mistake. Thomas, tell them. Tell them it was my money. Madeline set me up. She is crazy." The officers forcefully spun her around. They locked the steel cuffs around her wrists, right over the glittering diamond Rolex my father had just bought her. The loud metallic click echoed off the marble floors. Brittany started screaming from the other end of the table. "Mom, what is happening? Dad, do something." A second agent walked directly up to Brittany and handed her a thick manila envelope. "You are not under arrest today, Brittany," the agent said coldly. "But the Internal Revenue Service has placed an immediate levy on all your bank accounts. Your vehicles and your studio lease are currently being seized by federal authorities to cover your undeclared stolen income." Brittany dropped the envelope and collapsed into her chair, sobbing hysterically. Her fake influencer empire was completely eradicated in 10 seconds flat. Cassandra was wailing loudly now, dragging her expensive designer shoes across the marble as the agents pulled her toward the exit. She looked back at my father, pleading for him to save her. But Thomas just stood there staring at the velvet box on the table. He finally realized that his entire life was completely destroyed. The chaotic scene in the private dining room quickly devolved into a pathetic display of financial ruin. As the federal agents hauled Cassandra through the grand lobby of the country club, her screaming faded into the distance. Brittany was frantically tapping her phone screen, tears ruining her expensive makeup. She pulled out a pristine metal credit card and shoved it at one of the remaining police officers. "I have money," Brittany sobbed, her voice cracking with sheer desperation. "I can pay whatever fines there are. I am a brand ambassador. Just let me call my bank." The officer did not even blink. "Ma'am, your accounts no longer exist. The IRS seized your routing numbers 20 minutes ago. Every card in your wallet will decline." Brittany collapsed back into her chair, burying her face in her trembling hands. The wealthy business partners had completely vanished, abandoning my father to the wreckage of his own making. Thomas remained glued to the floor, his eyes darting between the forged mortgage deed and the wire transfer logs resting in the velvet box. He reached out with a shaking hand and traced the Cayman Islands' routing numbers. I stepped forward, closing the physical distance between us. The anger I had carried for months was entirely gone, replaced by a profound, chilling apathy. "She took the equity out of the house." Thomas whispered, his voice broken and hollow. My father looked up at me desperately, seeking some kind of validation or comfort. "She took the $400,000. But we can get it back, right? We can trace the accounts and reverse the transfers." Naomi stepped into the dining room holding her tablet. She walked directly up to my father, radiating absolute professional authority. "You are not getting a single cent back," Naomi stated firmly. "The money Cassandra routed offshore was not meant for a joint retirement fund. I tracked the final destination accounts. She set up the Cayman trusts entirely under her own maiden name, legally excluding you from any access." The moment she realized Madeline was looking into the old journals, Cassandra initiated a mass liquidation protocol. She was actively moving the last remaining assets out of the country this very morning. Thomas staggered backward as if he had been physically struck. He gripped the edge of the heavy mahogany table to keep from falling. "She was leaving me." Thomas gasped, his face draining of all color. "She saddled me with a fraudulent second mortgage, stole my children's college funds, and she was packing her bags to abandon me with the debt." "Yes," I replied coldly. "And since your name is listed on the primary deed of the estate, the bank holds you fully liable for the defaulted loan. You allowed her to orchestrate this massive fraud right under your nose. The bank initiated the foreclosure process on the family mansion yesterday afternoon. You are completely bankrupt, Dad. You traded your loyal family for a woman who just left you holding the bag for $500,000 in stolen equity." I did not wait for my father to respond. I turned my back on the wreckage of his life, linking my arms with Jason and Naomi, and walked out of the Emerald Country Club into the bright Sunday afternoon.